Raheel. You're as cuddly as a cactus, and as charming as an eel, Mr. Grinch. You're a bad banana with a greasy black just based on music, you're a monster, Mr. Grinch. Yes, you are. Your heart's an empty hole. Your brain is full of spatters. You got alligators all over, Mr. Grinch. I wouldn't touch you with a 39 and a half foot pole. I asked for 3/4, not 5/8. Stay focused. You know, if you ask the who's who of Whoville, no one's denying. Ow. Airbag's a little slow. But that's what they...
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our adult use application roadmap session for today. Happy 420. I am joined here today by my co-host, John Kagia, who I guess maybe pushed in a second. I don't know. Today, we're going to be going over the processor license, specifically processor type 3. This is our brand license. And so today's agenda will go over a lot of the intricacies of that license, what you need to know about it, why it's important to our two-tier market, why it's important for equity, small businesses, and access to this brand opportunity. Important to understand that if you want to be on the shelves in New York's legal market going forward, you will need this license. Processors will need to see your license number to white label your products. Retailers will need to see that license number to go on the shelf. Up until this point, it's just been a conditional licensing period where this kind of oversight hasn't been required because the adult use regulations were in public comment. Thank you for your comments. But we are moving into a new stage of the industry, and this license is going to be critical to the foundation of that market. So I want to wish everyone a happy holiday. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started. You're muted if you're saying anything. There it is. Is my head right next to it? Okay, now it's small. All right, roadmap to adult use cannabis licensing. Here's the agenda. I'm gonna briefly begin by going over our two-tier market, where the processor license fits into that two-tier market. Then I'm going to kick it over to John, who's going to talk very specifically about the processor type 3 brand license, some important dates to remember, and we'll do a little Q&A. So save your questions for the end, type them into the chat. I think our team is going through to pull out any questions they might have. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. Overview. Hey guys, we legalized weed 2021. Remember that? Big legalization bill. I won't go into the details. You all know it. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so our two-tier market. A lot of you guys have heard me wax on about this. John talk about it. Chris talk about it. Formerly, Chief of Staff Axel Burnaby talked about it. This is the foundation of our marketplace. There are few markets like it across the world. Washington State obviously is the one that we talk about the most. Canada also has a two-tier market. California originally had a two-tier market that kind of became a one-tier market over time. But this is the foundation of small business access and an equitable marketplace in New York. We're very proud to be launching our industry as a two-tier market. And so all you really have to understand is it's going to look a lot like our alcohol industry with tied houses. The biggest difference between the way the alcohol industry is set up in New York and the way we're setting up our market, alcohol is a three-tier market: producer, distributor, retailer. Ours is a two-tier market because every farmer, every licensed cultivator, micro business, all these producers can also get distribution licenses. They won't have to go through a distribution tier to sell their product. So it's a two-tier market: producers, retailers. This will foster competition and prevent well-capitalized operators from bullying other licensees out of the market. Okay, it's true. I love that word for this. Generally, there's some restrictions here when we're running a two-tier market. There's going to be a little bit more oversight in understanding who are the owners, the true parties of interest. A business also can't hold multiple licenses as long as those licenses are in the same tier. You can't own businesses across producer and retail tiers. But the most important thing for you to understand if you're going is to figure out which side of the market you want to play on, whether that's supply side or retail side, and then understand how many licenses you can have on the side you want to be on. We are very anti-license stacking here in New York. We don't think it leads to a very competitive or small business friendly marketplace. We can go to the next slide. So these are the licenses, displayed across the two tiers. Today, we're going to be focusing on this processor license type, not necessarily honing in on the type 1 and type 2 processor license type. Type 1, John will go into this in detail, but that's an extraction license. You can do everything with the type 1 processor license. That's extraction, infusion, packaging, labeling. Type 2 is just infusion. Think of it as a commercial kitchen, making small batch products. And then type 3, which we're going to talk about today, is our brand license, which allows for white labeling, packaging, and everything else. So next slide, please. True parties of interest. And so, by virtue of securing yourself a processor brand license, you will be subject to the same true party of interest, regulations, requirements, prohibitions as all other licensees. The only way we can understand who owns this brand, in the case of alcohol, who owns Jack Daniel's and where are they putting their money in the state of New York, is to understand who the true parties of interest are in your brand license. And so this is basic identifying details and contact information for your owners. Any previous convictions, sanctions, litigation that they've had, any other cannabis licenses they have or affiliations they have in other states or here in New York, as well as all goods and service agreements that the TPI would have that's on the license. Understand that this is not just like stuff we wrote down in regulations to look at because it's nice and pretty and it shows how smart we are. We absolutely plan to enforce this. We will have financial auditors. They will be, asking for paperwork, all of your goods and service agreements, all of your financial arrangements with other licensees in New York and in other states as well. This will not be a burden on our staff. We are contracting this out, so it will be happening. So it's critical that all the people who wish to enter this market understand true parties of interest and what it means for their business. I will go to the next slide, and I think we're kicking it over to John, to talk specifics about this license.
Thanks very much, Damien. As Damien had said, we're going to first talk about processors in general, and then talk specifically about this Type 3 processor license. So, as Damien said, a Type 1 processor license authorizes the licensee to do end-to-end processing activities. So you have the authorization, you have the ability to make purchases from cultivators of the raw biomass, flour, leaf trim, and other plant matter from the harvest. You're authorized to do the extraction in whatever mode you intend to use, butane hash oil, or you can use butane, use pressure, rosin, use ice water, however you want to do the extraction. You're allowed to do the manufacturing, which means taking the extract out of the biomass and infusing that into the edibles, the gummies, the value-added products, put a label on it, and sell it off either through a distributor or through your own distribution authorization. So that's a type 1 license, type 1 authorization, and it allows you to do end-to-end processing. A type 2 authorization does not give you the authorization to do the extraction, so you won't be able to remove the oils and other cannabis kind of extracts from the biomass, but you are allowed to do the manufacturing under a type 2 authorization. So, for example, if you are a chocolatier, you have a great deal of experience making chocolates, and that's all you want to do, a type 2 license might be the right one for you. Gives you the ability to buy the extracts, the oils that you might want to infuse from a type 1 processor, and then do that infusion yourself into the chocolates, package them, and sell them. So a type 2 allows you to do the manufacturing. It does not allow you to do the extraction. You can then package and sell. A type 3 authorization is this white label or branding license. And as Damien said, the easiest way to think about it is as a white labeling license. One example that we often use is the example of Costco. So Costco sells a lot of products under its Kirkland label, but Kirkland, many of the products sold under that label are not actually made by Costco. So, for example, recently we actually just found out that the coffee that Costco sells under the Kirkland brand is actually made by Starbucks. It's Starbucks coffee that has been white labeled. Starbucks has done the production and packaging, and then it's sold under Costco's Kirkland brand. So in this case, Costco is neither growing the coffee beans, it's not roasting the coffee, it's not putting it into packages, it's literally having it just shipped to its stores from Starbucks with its name on it. That's ostensibly what we're trying to achieve with this processor license. Next slide. So with that explanation of our type 1, 2, and 3 licenses, important to understand how many of each we're going to be issuing as part of this first licensing round. The goal here is to issue 55 type 1 licenses, so end-to-end processing authorization, 100 type 2 license for those who want to manufacture and then sell, and then for the type 3, we're really not capping this during this application window, partly because we think that this is a really timely moment in which to dramatically expand the branding opportunities in this market. And two, we kind of view this is a really important moment in the evolution of cannabis products and cannabis product manufacturing. So if we know that the next chapter of legal cannabis is going to be defined by brands rather than by commoditized products, we think this is a really kind of timely moment in which to create an ecosystem that allows cannabis brands to thrive. So we've talked about this at some length already. This slide just kind of recaps the authorizations for each. So type 1 allows you to do the processing activities listed, plus everything allowed by type 2 and type 3. A type 2 license is just for infusing and blending of cannabis products. And then the type 3 license, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is that packaging, labeling, and branding authorization. Really, really critical for folks to understand that if you are a brand that is currently being white labeled in New York right now under the adult use conditional or conditional cultivator or conditional processor program, then you will need to get a type 3 license in order to be sold in our market. So what does that mean? All of our current conditional cultivators and conditional processors will be transitioning to full licensing as we get to the end of this year. So all of the brands that are currently in market being produced by our AUCCs or AUCPs will now also need to get their own type 3 processor license at a minimum if they want to continue to be sold in New York. So really critical that brands currently operating in New York do this in a timely way. The application window is going to be closing on December 18th. And while we're getting the question on whether or not we're going to extend the application window, we haven't made a determination of that yet. So if you want to just kind of minimize the risk of there being disruption to your application, please be sure to submit by December 18th. I seem to be reading one slide in advance. This is kind of really stressing that point about one, only brands that have at least a Type 3 license will be able to be sold in New York. You'll need to register, as with everybody else in New York. This is a really kind of streamlined process. We have tried to make this as flexible and as accessible a license as possible. But it's a really critically important part of our market. And worth noting that, you know, the rules that apply for a Type 2 and a Type 1 processor really don't apply to a Type 3 processor in terms of finding a location where you'll need GMP certification in order to get operational. You know, as a Type 3 processor, particularly if you're not intending to engage in any significant packaging, labeling, or other distribution activities, you don't need a manufacturing location in order to apply for this. You can use just your general business address as the address in the application in order to submit this application. So to be clear, for a Type 3 processor license, if you're not going to be engaging in any of these kind of robust product touching or product creation activities, then you know, you can just use your standard business location to submit an application. You don't need a kind of commercial manufacturing location in order to apply. You don't need GMP certification for your location in order to do this. The barriers to securing this license are very low, and we encourage folks to look at the requirements as they consider which type of this license would be best for you. So the fees, I'll begin first with the application fee. As with all of our application fees, it's $1,000 to apply for a processing license, whether Type 1, 2, or 3. And if you qualify as a social or economic equity applicant, you will have a 50% discount applied to your application. A Type 1 processor license, end-to-end processing authorization, is $7,000. A Type 2 license, which is limited to just manufacturing, blending, and infusion, is $4,000. And then the license we're talking about here today, the Type 3 processor license, is $2,000. So really, you know, think about it as $1,000 a year if you're not a social equity applicant. If you are a social equity applicant, your licensing fees would also be discounted by 50%. So here you would be talking about $3,500 for a Type 1, $2,000 for a Type 2, or $1,000 for a Type 3, which works out at $500 a year. Really, really accessible. And then can't stress this enough. The application window, it opened on October 4th. It is going to close on December 18th at 5 p.m. We are government, so that's 5 p.m., not midnight Eastern or Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please get your applications in. We've already extended the deadline by 2 weeks to give folks more of an opportunity to apply. And we hope that the next 3 weeks will give folks plenty of time to get these applications in. It's a fairly straightforward application. We've tried to make it as easy as possible. And we look forward to having this license be one that dramatically stimulates the emergence of New York brands, both from right here in New York. We know a lot of legacy folks who are very interested in getting into this market. We know a lot of out-of-state brands are interested in this market. So really, really bullish about this brand and the opportunity, this license and the opportunity it creates for brands to flourish in the state of New York. So some contact info, if you aren't already receiving email updates from OCM, please sign up at ocm.ny. or at cannabis.ny.gov. You can sign up for updates so that you're receiving all of the notifications from the office. If you have questions specifically about licensing, please submit those to aulicensing@ocm.ny.gov. And finally, follow us on all of our socials at NYS_cannabis.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. So, before we jump into questions, just a few points. When talking about this opportunity and giving you all the info, you need to make informed business decisions. John and I will be blunt. That's just how we roll. This information will help you and your business partners make a joint decision. But to those watching at home and if you want access to these legal shelves in the next year, you're going to need this license. If you don't play by the rules and violate the regulations and try and access shelf space without a brand license, your business will go up in smoke. So it's important to really take this seriously. And with that, I'll start listing off some questions we've got. This is an important one, John. We've talked about this. Does this license type 3, I assume they're talking about type 3 processor license, need a location already secured?
No. Well, so you will need an address for the business, but you can use your standard business address for this. So this isn't going to need a manufacturing location the way you would need for a type 1 or a type 2. You can just use your general business address as a location for this. We understand there's been some confusion around that. We're updating the FAQs as we speak. But to be clear, you do not need a manufacturing location that has GMP capabilities like you might need for a type 1 and type 2. You can just use your business, your standard business address as a location for this.
Are these adult use processing licenses currently only available to those already processing a hemp processor's license? The answer to that is no. There is no more preferential avenues for hemp processors or cultivators, CBD brands to enter the adult use market. This is open to everybody. This license is open to everyone who wants to launch a brand in New York State.
Yep.
How will I get on the shelves next year if I'm not ready to apply yet for a processor brand license? That's a good question. And so obviously the window closes December 18th. So if you are interested in launching that brand next year, please do apply by that deadline. But there will obviously be other application windows that we will open up. As John mentioned earlier, this is an unlimited license. It's more of a registration with the state, honestly. And so we intend to include it in every subsequent round of licensing that we launch. So there will be a window again in the coming year, probably, hopefully in the first half of next year to also apply.
And just following up on that, we've heard from several different prospective licensees or applicants this question of, well, if it's unlimited, could you just keep the application window so that these can be done on a rolling basis? We haven't made a decision on that yet. So please do treat December 18th as the date at which this is going to conclude. This application window is going to conclude. If you can get it in before then, please do so. We will be looking at, as Damien said, future licensing rounds. But as it currently stands, we don't yet have the intention of keeping this application window indefinitely open, partly because of the number of licenses, number of applications we have to review once the application window closes on December 18th.
My business partner is a card licensee. Can they be a TPI on my processor brand license? You want to take that, John?
So your business partner is a TPI.
Is a retailer, yeah. So it's a violation of the tier, yeah.
Yeah, so our 2-tier market rules apply here. And broadly speaking, if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at our true party of interest rules, Damien alluded to them earlier, this is a really important part of the market that you need to understand. Broadly speaking, you can either be a supplier in this market or you can be a retailer in this market, but you cannot cross both tiers in most cases. So what does that mean? It means as a supplier, you can either be a cultivator, processor, or distributor. Or on the retail side, you can be a retailer, or two more licenses we haven't issued yet, but are going to fall on the retail side of the ledger are direct-to-consumer delivery licenses, as well as our consumption lounge licenses. So if you're either doing cultivation, manufacturing, or distribution, and including if you have a micro, which counts as a supply side license, then you can only play on the supply side of the market. We have very clear and very kind of strict rules around particularly retail TPIs having supply side interests. Broadly speaking, it's not allowed. And we will be looking very closely at TPI relationships across the ecosystem of the licensees we have. So generally, if it's somebody on the supply side, they can't be on the processor side. They can't be on the if it's somebody on the retail side, they can't be on the supply side. They can't have a processor interest. And so be careful as you're setting up your business relationships to understand where your partners, your investors sit in the market, because it will influence in what other types of businesses they may also be able to have an interest.
This question also kind of piggybacks on that. Are there any restrictions on which processors I can white label with once I have a brand license? So I guess the manufacturer, are there any restrictions or prohibitions related to that?
Not really. So you will find that while our rules may have some very clear guidelines, like the crossing of the two-tier markets, which we clearly prohibit, broadly speaking, particularly within the tiers, we provide quite a lot of latitude in terms of how you want to operate as a business. So if you want to set up multiple agreements, white label agreements with manufacturers in the space, you can do that. If you want to switch who is doing your white labeling for that, that's entirely up to you. We're not really intervening intensively in the types of business deals you might want to structure. We're just setting up a broad framework in terms of where in the market you are allowed to capture or where you're allowed to play. So our rules are really intended just to make sure that everyone is only playing and capturing the parts of the market or their share of the market that's appropriate to the vertical that they're participating in. But in terms of the business relationships that you're setting up within your vertical, we generally don't tend to be too prescriptive there.
Oh, this is a good one. I just want to reiterate, because the question came up a few more times. You do need to have a commercial business residence, location, address, physical location to apply for the license. So that could be, the business that you have registered, the address it's registered at, which you have to have anyway for the application. Yep. This is a good question. Should type 1 processor applicants apply for type 2 and 3 to ensure they don't get shut out if they don't get chosen for type 1? Will it count as disqualification? That is a really good question.
That's a good question. Okay, so we have been saying that you should only apply for the number of licenses that you are allowed to hold. For a processor license, you can be each entity can have one processor license, but you can be a TPI in an unlimited number of processors. So there is some flexibility there in terms of how you might want to kind of apply for a processor license, but you've got to be careful. So a single entity would not be able to apply for all 3 licenses because you're only allowed to hold one of those licenses. However, if, say, you had different entities applying for multiple processor licenses, theoretically one could do it that way, where if it's a different entity with a different kind of TPI and stakeholder interest, that might be one way in which you could apply. But in terms of a single entity with the same majority shareholder applying for 3 separate processor licenses, that would not be permitted, and you would really have to end up picking the one that you want to be considered for review. We're going to be reaching out to folks who have broken this rule in terms of they've applied for more licenses than they were qualified for, and will essentially be narrowing your selection down to 1. So, just to be aware, if you are attempting to, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but if you're trying to game the system by applying for more licenses than you are eligible for, you may just end up kind of throwing that money away, because we're not going to consider all of those applications.
Yep. This is a good question. Are there any location restrictions for the processor type 3 premises? So when it comes to the brand license, no, there's, it's where your business is registered, physical location and address, a PO box. There is, when it comes to type 1, type 2, and a type 3 that is actually doing minimal processing, I believe it would need to be as a physical, zoned appropriately location that you have a lease for. But with this type 3 license, we're really just looking for a business address. One thing I also want to add that I think gets lost in this, and probably gets lost because it's easy to get lost in this, is that processor licenses are also available to other license holders.
Yep.
A cultivator can add a processor type 1, 2, and 3 to their license. A micro business can add processor type 1, type 2, type 3 to their business. There are certain foundational licenses that can add or remove, and we're going to have more operability on the back end with our NIBE business application portal to do this. You just pay the annual licensing fee to add a processor license to your cultivation license. Submit the necessary paperwork, and you'll be good to go. It's not another random queuing situation. It's something that you are entitled to with your cultivation license. Same goes for distribution license.
So that's a really critical point, Damien, and I think it's worth belaboring a little bit. So if your expertise is cultivation, then apply for a cultivation license, because you'll be able to get a processor and a distribution license once you have that cultivation license. But it doesn't work in reverse. So if you get a distro license, then you can't bolt on a cultivation license to it.
Yeah.
So kind of apply for the license in the area of expertise that you have, and then you can add on either processing or distribution as needed. But the really important to understand that you don't need to apply for all 3 in order to be able to engage in those activities. If you're a cultivator, then you can do processing and distribution. If you're a processor, you can add on distribution. And that's a separate application process. You wouldn't be going through the lottery process. There's hard to see a scenario where you would be applying for this additional kind of authorization. If you're in good standing as a processor, there's really no reason why you wouldn't be able to get that distribution option. So apply for the business that is kind of primary to your interest or expertise, and then you can tack on these additional licenses as just par for through a separate kind of application process with Office.
This next question reminds me of a larger point that I wanted to make. If you have a type 3 processor license, can you make more than one brand and partner with more than one company? Yes, absolutely. A lot of our bigger brands that are already in the shelves right now, they have multiple different brands under one house. But the point I did want to make is that when we were coming up with these regulations, we were talking to a lot of people who do white labeling in other states, or who have grows or manufacturing facilities in other states. And so there's a scenario here where if we had gone a different route, there would have been one route to entering and get on the legal shelf in New York, and that would have been to build a cultivation facility, rent out a processing facility, get all the extraction equipment, and make your own products yourself, which necessarily would involve companies that are headquartered in California, Oregon, Chicago, wherever, having to spend $10 million, $20 to build a new facility in New York. Which is what a lot of MSOs are doing. It's very difficult to be profitable when you have multiple different heavy infrastructure and equipment facilities in multiple different states, all operating under different regulations. When we talk to a couple of these businesses that have these facilities in multiple different states, time zones in some cases, it seemed to them, and it seemed to a lot of entrepreneurs, that it would be easier for them to white label with an existing operator in New York, for example, through a contracting agreement. And if they were comfortable with their standards of production, with their the talent of their grower to actually grow the genetics that and the products that that individual wants to sell in New York, they'd be comfortable entering into a contracting agreement with them. They would spend much less in terms of infrastructure and equipment and hiring, and instead put their money, invest their money into an existing operational processor that's already over here. This is something that I think adds a lot of flexibility to the processor brand license. You can eventually, this state will see well over 1,000 dispensaries across the state selling cannabis to millions of consumers. You could be in hundreds of those stores, and then you could be in stores in New Jersey. You could be in stores in other states, all without the added cost of running a 50, 100-person facility. And so that is something that people should consider when they think about the ability to scale. If they have an idea for pre-rolls or gummies or oatmeal raisin cookies, you can start small here in New York, and you can acquire your consumer base. You can dial in your branding, and you can grow organically and expand to other states. That is something that people should really be thinking about. I mean, this license and this market in general in New York is intended to unleash a lot of innovation in the product space. I know I'm a little tired of the same old products in other legal markets. And what we really want to do, we want to see entrepreneurs do with this opportunity, is to show us new ways of consuming cannabis and branding their products and reaching consumers.
I think that's a really kind of powerful point, Damien. And just to belabor it a little bit, because it ties to one of the questions I've seen come through around whether there are restrictions on the types of products that you can make under a white label license. And not only is the answer to that no, the part of the opportunity we see in this brand license is the ability to give a set of specs to a manufacturer, to a type 1 or a type 2 processor, and say, this is my vision for what a product I'd like to see made. There's really no restrictions in terms of the type of innovation that you as the white labeler could be directing your manufacturing partners to try and create for this product. So we're encouraging folks to think really expansively, because there's plenty of latitude here to really innovate new products and new concepts.
All right, we'll do one more question and then we'll close it out. Does a PO box count as an address for this processor type 3 license type? I don't know on the back end technically if that'll trigger some sort of error in the system. Could you please email our office with that question? What was the email again? Maybe Sierra, could you put it in the chat? Email our office with that question. We'll make sure that it should, but it may not. Yeah, send it to licensing, and we'll dig into that.
Yeah.
And we'll close it out there.
Related to that, actually, just related to that. So, in terms of multiple locations being multiple businesses from a single address, I suppose that's possible. I mean, you can. It is possible to register multiple businesses from a single address, so that's fine. Two, important to understand that there is not a provisional and final licensing kind of for the type 3 processor. Yeah. So if you have a business that is registered, that business has an address. And so you can use that. You don't need to go out and register as a provisional for a type 3 processor and then go out and find a new physical location. I'm assuming if you have a business registered, that business was registered to a given address, and you can just submit that. So don't think about this in the same sort of cluster as the rest of the licenses, where there's that clear distinction between a provisional that doesn't have a location and a final which has a location where the licensed activities would be taking place.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Any closing statements, John? Any wishes to the audience? out and ready to land?
First, just thank you for your interest and engagement. A great set of questions here. We're very bullish about this license. I do have to, Damien, I have to respond to this one question we didn't get to, but it is around who qualifies for C. Somebody had said anybody but a white man, and that is just so not true and not accurate. So our 5, broadly speaking, social and economic equity categories are people who are from communities that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. We've got a great map on our website that shows New York State for over 30 years. It identifies the communities that were disproportionately impacted. That doesn't have a race dimension to it. That's just based on where you lived. We also have service-disabled veterans, distressed farmers, women and minority-owned businesses, and then we have a special category of folks that we're calling extra priority, which just means that they meet 3 evaluatory criteria. They are from a community that was disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. They had a cannabis arrest or conviction, and they are earning less than 80% of the average income in the county where they're from. There's a lot of diversity, racial and socioeconomic, in our defined categories for C. And so we would encourage you to look at the way we have created our C groups to identify which of those groups that you might qualify for. Please include that in your application. It's really helpful for us as we to kind of help optimize and maximize the richness of socioeconomic diversity in our marketplace.
Awesome. Last question. Any closing remarks, John, besides that?
No. December 18th, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Please get your applications in, and thank you for the great engagement here today.
I just want to thank you everybody for coming out, talking about this license, learning about it. December 18th deadline. We will be back at the same time next week. John and I will not be back, but my colleague Tabitha will be back to talk about social and economic equity, as John alluded to earlier. It's a big tent. Actually, our social and economic equity categories include about 75% of the United States population. So a lot of people are in there. So don't worry about not having a shot in that. It's our goal to create a diverse and reflective marketplace that looks like New York. New York just happens to be a very diverse state. And we think our market should look exactly like that as well. So I want to wish everyone a happy holidays. Go ahead, John, what did you say?
No, and we're open for business.
And we're open for business. I want to say happy holidays to everyone. I'm about to go buy a tree. There's something magical about lighting up a tree around Christmas time. So I encourage all of you to do so as well. And thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.